Welcome to Sleep Tight Frights, the place where bedtime stories don't always end sweetly. I'm Evergrey, your storyteller in the shadows. Each tale is a little strange, a little spooky, and just creepy enough to keep you peeking over the covers. So settle in, close your eyes, but don't fall asleep just yet. Welcome back, Frightlings. The summer haze is fading, backpacks are heavy again, and pencils are scratching across fresh pages. The beginning of the school season always feels a little eerie, doesn't it? New hallways to wander, new lockers to rattle, new classmates whose names you don't quite remember. As we walk into the months ahead, we aren't just entering classrooms, we're stepping into stories, some bright, some shadowed, and some that linger in the corners where no one dares to sit. This tale is just a quick peek at what's waiting in the many weeks to come, a whisper from the back row, a reminder that not everyone on the attendance list belongs, and not everyone who belongs is ever written down. So sharpen your pencils, keep your eyes open, and count your classmates carefully, one by one. Because if you don't, you might end up sitting beside someone who was never supposed to be there. Tonight's story is called The Classmate Who Wasn't on the List. The school smelled like pencil shavings, wet wool coats, and the lemony tang of floor polish. A smell that meant September had returned. The classroom buzzed faintly under the flickering fluorescent lights. The bulbs always hummed loudest near the back of the room, where the shadows never quite lifted. Evelyn sat 2 rows from the front, chin in her hand, already doodling in the margin of her math book. She was 13, starting grade 8, which meant she was supposed to be too old for nerves, but still young enough to feel them anyway. Her hair was mousy brown, usually pulled back into a ponytail that frayed by lunch. Her hazel eyes weren't the bright kind people noticed. Her face was plain, the kind that people sometimes forgot, even though she was sat beside them the whole year. She knew it, too. Being invisible had its uses, like slipping through the halls without anyone bothering you, but it also meant people forgot to invite you places. Sometimes even teachers forgot to call on you. That was why Evelyn noticed things. She noticed the way Marcus always tapped his pencil 3 times before speaking. She noticed the faint crack in the window where a spider had spun a web that caught the morning light. She noticed the desk at the back, shadowed by the coat hooks, where a boy sat perfectly still. Miss Calder straightened her glasses and called the first name on the attendance list. Evelyn, here. Jordan, here. Marcus, here. One by one, the names filled the air like stepping stones across a river. Evelyn counted silently, her pencil tapping against the desk. 27, 28, 29, 30. But there weren't 30 kids. There were 31. Her eyes drifted back to the last row. The boy was there. Dark hair, cut too straight, sweater gray as chalk dust. His skin pale, almost colorless, his eyes too wide and steady, as though he was afraid to blink and miss something. He didn't fidget, didn't look at his notebook, didn't move at all. Evelyn waited for Miss Calder to say his name. She didn't. Instead, the teacher closed the attendance sheet with a crisp snap. "All here," she said, even though Evelyn knew that wasn't true. A prickle ran up Evelyn's arm. She glanced sideways, expecting Jordan or Marcus to be staring too. But they weren't. No one else seemed to see him. The boy's eyes slid sideways just a fraction, enough to meet hers. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She snapped her gaze back at her paper, scribbling shapes she didn't mean to. When she dared another glance, he was still looking, still not blinking. By the time Miss Calder turned back to the blackboard and chalk began scratching across the slate, Evelyn told herself she was just imagining it. Maybe the boy was new and just shy. Maybe she'd missed his name on the list. Still, she kept counting. 30 desks, 31 students. The one who didn't belong. By the time the bell rang and Miss Calder dismissed them, Evelyn's head was buzzing. Kids poured into the hallway, their sneakers squeaking against the polished tile, laughter bouncing off lockers, the smell of cafeteria pizza drifting up from the basement. But all Evelyn could think of was the boy in the gray sweater. She lingered by the coat hooks, pretending to adjust her scarf, sneaking one last glance at the back desk. He hadn't moved the entire lesson, not once. His notebook was open, but the page was blank. His pencil lay untouched. His eyes had stayed fixed forward, wide and steady, never blinking. Finally, Evelyn gathered her bag and slipped into the crowd. She asked her friend Jordan, "Hey, who's the new kid?" Jordan tilted his head. "New kid?" "Yeah, back row by the window, gray sweater, pale face." Evelyn kept her voice casual, like she wasn't testing him. But Jordan laughed. "You mean the empty desk? Nobody sits there. It's been empty since last year." Evelyn froze. "No, he was right there. You didn't see?" Jordan shrugged. "You're imagining stuff." He shoved his hands in his pockets and headed for the door. Marcus passed them, grinning. "What are you arguing about?" "Evelyn thinks there's a ghost in class," Jordan teased. Evelyn's cheeks burned. "I didn't say that," but the words had planted themselves in her head. Ghost. That night, Evelyn couldn't let it go. She pulled her notebook onto her desk and sharpened a pencil until the shavings curled like ribbons. Carefully, she began to sketch the boy. She drew the heavy hair that hung too straight, shaded the strands until her wrists ached. She captured the hollow cheeks, the blank eyes that looked right through her. She even shaded the folds of the gray sweater, soft and shapeless. When she finished, she wrote underneath "back seat, not on roll call." Her hazel eyes stared at the page until they watered. Something about the drawing made her uneasy, like she had pulled the boy closer just by putting him on paper. She tore the page out and slipped it under her pillow before turning off the light. Sleep came in patches. Evelyn dreamed of chalk dust swirling in the air, of the scraping sounds of desks being dragged across the floor, of whispers too faint to understand. She woke more than once, heart pounding, the shadows of her room feeling crowded. By morning, she pulled the paper out. The page was blank. Her drawing had vanished. Not erased, not smudged, just gone. Only the faintest trace of pencil dust stained the fibers, like the paper had decided it wanted to be empty again. Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, clutching the useless page. A sick feeling crawled up her spine. At breakfast, her mama asked if she'd slept well. Evelyn nodded, but her voice cracked. She wanted to tell her, wanted to say that there's a boy in class no one else remembered, that he had stared at her too long, that her drawing had disappeared, but the words stuck. Because maybe Jordan was right. Maybe she really was imagining it. Still, as she packed her bag for school, Evelyn grabbed a sticky note from the counter and scrawled 3 words in block letters. "Do not forget." She pressed it inside her math book as if the warning could hold her memory in place. Monday morning dragged in gray and wet. Rain streaked the windows, dripping down the lines that blurred the outside world. The hum of the fluorescent lights was louder than usual, and one bulb in the back corner kept flickering in and out, stuttering like a heartbeat. Evelyn slid into her seat, her math book heavy in her bag. She checked the sticky note she had written, "Do not forget." The words glared back at her in the block letters. She pressed the note between her fingers until the paper softened, as if sheer force could keep the memory alive. Her eyes went to the back row. He was there. Same gray sweater, same pale, hollow cheeks, same wide, unblinking eyes. The desk in front of him was empty, as if no one wanted to sit too close. Evelyn's stomach tightened. It hadn't been a dream. She wasn't imagining him. Miss Calder began attendance. One name after another. Evelyn kept count on her fingers, waiting for 30, and then 31. But as before, the list stopped at 30. "All here," Miss Calder said briskly. Her voice was too sharp, too final, like she was closing a door. Evelyn noticed her eyes never drifted to the back. In fact, when Miss Calder paced the rows to pass out worksheets, she slowed her steps near that desk. For just an instant, her body went rigid, as if she felt the pressure there. Then she carried on, deliberately, carefully, not looking. Evelyn's pencil hovered over her paper. Miss Caldwell was pretending. She knew someone was sitting in the back. She just wasn't acknowledging it. An unspoken rule. Evelyn's chest tightened. The more she thought about it, the more it unnerved her. Maybe that was why Jordan and Marcus laughed it off. Maybe everyone had learned to ignore it. Maybe that was the only way to stay safe. But Evelyn couldn't. She had already noticed, and once you notice, you couldn't unsee. Her hand moved before she could stop it. She lifted it just slightly in a half wave towards the boy in the back. For a moment, nothing. He sat like stone. Then his head turned. Slowly, too slowly, like an old film reel stuttering frame by frame. His eyes locked with hers, hazel meeting black. Her lungs squeezed tight, her breath stuck in her throat. It felt like he was holding it hostage, like he was pulling it into himself. She jerked her eyes away, heart pounding. Her hand trembled when it rested on the desk. She tried to focus on the worksheet, but the numbers blurred. The air smelt faintly of chalk dust, stronger than usual, as though the walls themselves were crumbling. She told herself not to look again. Don't look. Don't. But curiosity tugged harder than fear. When she finally risked another glance, his gaze hadn't shifted, still locked on her, still unblinking. That night, Evelyn dreamed again. The classroom was empty except for her, the desks pushed into strange, uneven rows. The chalkboard stretched wider than it should have, filling the wall, and across it, words appeared in jagged, white scratches, each letter shrieking as though carved with nails. Do not call the name. She woke with hands clenched in her sheets, her fingernails half mooning her palms. The smell of chalk clung to her pillow. Tuesday morning was damp and gray, the kind of morning where fog pressed against the school windows and turned the world outside into a blur. Evelyn arrived early, clutching her math book to her chest. The sticky note she had written, "Do not forget," was still tucked inside. The hallways stretched long and empty, the lockers towering over her like metal soldiers. Normally the air was alive with shouts, the slam of doors, the squeak of sneakers, but this morning the silence pressed down heavy. Her footsteps echoed. She passed the trophy case, its glass smudged with fingerprints, the photographs inside showing smiling faces from decades past. But for some reason, Evelyn felt uneasy looking at them. She could almost swear there were more faces than last time, faint outlines in the corners, kids she didn't recognize. She quickened her pace. That was when she heard it. A whisper, right behind her ear. Don't let them forget me. Her breath caught. She spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. The window was empty, the polished floor stretching away in both directions. Her math book slipped from her arms and hit the floor with a smack. Pages splayed out, the sticky note fluttering loose. The words, "Do not forget," stared up at her. Her fingers shook as she scooped it up. A door slammed at the far end of the hall. Evelyn jumped, clutching her book to her chest like a shield. The sound of footsteps grew louder, then faded as a custodian pushed a cart into another room. It had just been her imagination. It had to be. But when she stepped into the classroom, the air told her otherwise. The boy was there, sitting in the back seat as always, pale gray, unmoving, but this time his head was tilted just slightly, as if he was listening. Evelyn froze in the doorway. She couldn't look away. The lights flickered once, and for an instant the shadows across his face deepened. It almost looked like his mouth had moved, like he was repeating the whisper. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She forced her legs to move, sliding into her usual seat. The rest of the class shuffled in, noisy and oblivious. Backpacks thumped, desks screeched. Laughter filled the room, but none of it touched the back row. When Miss Calder began roll call, Evelyn kept her eyes down, pencil scratching hard against the desk. She didn't dare look back, but she could feel it. The stare bore into her, holding her breath hostage again. When the list ended at 30, the words from the hall echoed in her mind. Don't let them forget me. Her stomach twisted. Whoever, whatever he was, didn't just want to be seen. He wanted to be remembered. By Wednesday, Evelyn felt stretched thin, like her nerves were violin strings wound too tight. Every time she blinked, she half expected to open her eyes and find the gray sweater boy standing closer. Every time she turned the page in her notebook, she wondered if the sticky note would still be there or if the words would vanish like her drawing had. She couldn't stand the silence anymore. If no one else would admit he was there, she would. Her pencil hovered over the corner of her math sheet, Carefully, she tore off a piece of lined paper, folded it twice to make it small. Her fingers trembled as she wrote, "Who are you?" The words looked flimsy, barely enough to hold the weight of her question, but that was all she could manage. The lesson dragged on. Miss Calder's chalk screeching across the board, the other kids yawning or tapping their feet. Evelyn's pulse beat heavy in her throat. She waited until Miss Calder turned to erase the board. Then she let her pencil roll to the floor. Bending down, she slid the note across the tiles, just far enough that it touched the leg of the back desk. She straightened, cheeks hot, praying no one had seen. Minutes passed. She doodled spirals on her worksheet, sweat prickling her palms. Then, slowly, the paper slid back. Evelyn froze. She couldn't see a hand pushing it. It just glided inch by inch until it brushed her shoe. Her breath hitched. She bent down, heart hammering, and she picked it up. One word was sprawled across the paper in jagged, uneven letters, darker and rougher than her pencil could make. Missing. The paper smelt faintly of mothballs and chalk dust. She held it under her desk, staring until the letters blurred. She wanted to ask more. Missing who? Missing where? Missing what? But the air around her felt thick, heavy, warning her not to. When the bell rang, she crumpled the note in her fist and shoved it into her pocket. At lunch, Evelyn pulled it out to show Jordan, desperate for someone else to see. But when she unfolded the paper, the word was gone. The page was clean. Jordan raised an eyebrow. "What am I looking at?" "Nothing," Evelyn muttered. That night, Evelyn couldn't stop herself. She wrote another note, hands shaking. "What do you want?" She didn't dare slide it across the floor in class. Instead, she tucked it into her math book and left the book open on her desk before she went to bed. When she woke, the note was shredded into teeny strips, littered across her desk like confetti. Her sticky note, the one that said "Do not forget," was still in place, but a faint chalk fingerprint smudged the edge. Friday morning, the class felt wrong before Evelyn even sat down. The lights flickered harder than usual, buzzing with a sickly hum that made the back of her teeth ache. A draft slid down from the ceiling, but it smelled less like air conditioning and more like dust from the bottom of an old attic. Even the desks seemed pulled tighter together, their legs screeching faintly across the floor whenever someone shifted. Evelyn pressed her fingers against her notebook. The sticky note, "Do not forget," was still tucked inside, but her heart beat so loudly that the words might shake loose. The boy in the gray sweater was already there. His eyes never left the room, but Evelyn knew better. She could feel the stare bending towards her, tugging like gravity. Miss Calder entered briskly, her heels tapping sharp against the tile. She looked paler than usual, her lips pressed in a thin line as she lifted the clipboard. "Attendance," she said, though her voice didn't carry its usual snap. One by one, the names filled the air. "Evelyn, here." Her own voice sounded too loud. She counted her fingers. 25, 26, 27. "Jordan, here. Marcus, here. 28, 29, 30. His stomach nodded. This was always where it ended, always where Miss Calder snapped the sheet closed and said, "All here." But today, the teacher froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her fingers trembled against the paper. A hush spread across the room, heavier than silence, as if the air was holding its breath. For the first time all week, Miss Calder's eyes flickered to the back row, just for an instant. Then, in a low, reluctant voice, she read a name Evelyn had never heard before. The sound of it scraped across the room like a nail dragged down a chalkboard. Every muscle in Evelyn's body locked. The boy in the gray sweater blinked. The world tilted. It was the first time Evelyn had ever seen him move. His eyelids closed, slow and heavy, like they hadn't in years. When they opened again, his eyes weren't just eyes, they were windows. Dozens of faces pressed against the glass, faint and flickering. A girl with braids from the 1960s, a boy in suspenders, a child in a faded uniform from a decade Evelyn couldn't place. Their mouths opened and closed, but no sound came. More faces crowded behind them, layer upon layer, blurring into one another like old photographs rubbed thin. Evelyn clutched her desk, nails digging into the wood. The classroom was still. Her classmates didn't stir. Even Marcus, who's always tapping his pencil, was frozen mid-motion. Miss Calder's eyes were locked on the clipboard, wide and fearful, and in that frozen silence, Evelyn realized the truth. He wasn't just one boy. He was all of them. Every kid who had ever been overlooked, ignored, erased, every quiet voice that had faded too far into the background. They had gathered together wearing one body like a borrowed coat, and now someone had spoken their name aloud. The unspoken rule was broken. Evelyn's breath came in shallow gasps. The boy, no, the thing in the gray sweater blinked again, and each time the lids lifted, the crowd of faces behind his eyes grew clearer. A girl with braids and a collared dress stared back, her face pale and blurred, like an old yearbook photo left out in the rain. Her lips moved soundlessly, syllables Evelyn couldn't hear. Beside her, a boy with suspenders and hair slicked flat against his head pressed forward, his expression empty. His outline flickered like static on a broken TV. Behind them were dozens more. A child with freckles, a teenager in a faded sweater vest, another with glasses cracked across one lens, each face strained to be seen, jostling for space, pressing forward until the black of the eyes were nothing but a swarm of pale faces layered on top of each other. Evelyn's stomach turned. She gripped her desk until her knuckles ached, and then she saw one that made her blood run cold. A girl no older than her cousin, with the same shaped nose and crooked smile. Her cousin who had switched schools last year without saying goodbye. Evelyn blinked hard, but the face was still there, caught in the tide of the others, fading in and out like a half-remembered dream. Her throat clenched. She wanted to call out, she wanted to scream, but the classroom was locked in silence. Jordan sat motionless in the desk beside her, his pencil hovering above his paper mid-scribble. Marcus had his hand raised halfway, frozen like a photograph. Even Miss Calder didn't move, her eyes wide and glassy. Her mouth parted as if the name she had spoken had trapped her. The only sound was the hum of the lights, steady and low, and Evelyn's own heartbeat pounding in her ears. The gray sweater boy's lips didn't move, but his voice filled the room anyways. Dozens of voices, layered and overlapping, spilling from him in whispers. "We are here! We are here! We are here!" The chant grew louder, building into a hiss that scratched against the walls. Evelyn's hazel eyes darted from one classmate to the next. Nobody else flinched. Nobody else heard. She wanted to look away, but the faces held her. The more she stared, the more she recognized things that felt too close. A haircut she remembered from an old photo of her mom's class. A birthmark like the one a neighborhood kid had. Even a smile that looked like her own. Her skin prickled cold. Her skin prickled cold. The ghost wasn't just full of strangers. It was full of people who had been forgotten. People who had been erased. And the more she stared, the more she feared she might see her own face in there too. Trapped and fading. Her hand slipped in her pocket, fingers brushing the crumpled note she'd kept. Missing. The words pulsed in her head louder now, echoing through the chant. Missing wasn't a warning. Missing was a state of being. Their faces pressed closer, but Evelyn felt them pushing against the inside of her skull, tugging at her memory. She jerked her head back, staring at her desk, tears stinging her eyes. When she dared to glance back up, the faces had pulled back, retreating into the depths of the ghost's gaze. But she knew they hadn't gone away. They were waiting, watching, waiting for the next name to be forgotten. The classroom felt like it had slipped underwater. The faces in the gray sweater boys' eyes swirled and whispered. Their overlapping voices pressed into Evelyn's skull. Her classmates remained statues, caught mid-breath, mid-motion. Even the clock hands on the wall had frozen between seconds. Only she and the ghost moved. The gray sweater boy leaned forward, slow and stiff, as though his joints had rusted. His chair creaked through, though Evelyn was certain it had never made a sound before. When his mouth opened, the whispers sharpened. Don't. The word wasn't one voice, but a dozen. 100, layered together until it rattled her bones. Evelyn's pencil rolled off her desk, clattering onto the floor, but she couldn't make her body bend to pick it up. The ghost lips moved again, dragging across words like heavy stone. Don't ignore the quiet ones. The air grew cold enough that her breath misted in front of her. Don't let us vanish again. Evelyn's throat locked. She wanted to scream for help, to bolt from her desk, to tear the sticky note from her notebook and clutch it like a shield. but the weight of those eyes held her in place. She felt them pressing against her mind, like they could hollow her out if she stayed silent too long. Her thoughts blurred. The faces whispered louder. "We are here. We are here. We are here." Her own name slipped from her memory for half a second, gone, blank. Panic jolted her again. If she stayed silent, she realized she would join them. Another forgotten face in the tide. Her lips trembled, but she forced them to move. "I won't." The words cracked like brittle twigs. Her voice sounded thin, but it carried. "I won't forget you." The classroom seemed to shiver. The whispers faltered. The faces in the ghost's eyes pulled back, their features blurring at the edges. Evelyn's heart hammered as she gripped the desk. She could hardly believe she'd spoken, but she didn't stop. "I'll remember," she whispered. "I'll tell people. I see you. I know you're there." For the first time since she noticed him, the gray sweater boy's expression changed. His lips curved, not a smile exactly, but something caught between relief and grief. The corners of his mouth twitched, as if unused to the shape. The air warmed by a fraction. Her classmates stirred, pencils scratching again, chairs squeaking against the floor. Miss Calder cleared her throat and continued the lesson like nothing had happened. Only Evelyn knew the truth. The ghost had been heard, and she had promised. The bell rang with a jolt, loud and shrill, as if nothing strange had happened at all. Evelyn blinked. The gray sweater boy was gone. The back desk sat empty, its surface bare and dustless, as though no one had touched it in years. Her classmates stretched and yawned, rubbing their eyes, packing up their books. Marcus laughed at something Jordan had whispered. The ordinary noise of middle school swelled again, covering the silence that had weighed on the room only moments before. Miss Calder stacked her papers neatly, her movement brisk and sharp. "Don't forget your homework over the weekend," she said, tapping the edge of the chalkboard. Her voice trembled just slightly, though no one else seemed to notice. Evelyn gathered her things slowly, her fingers stiff. She glanced back one more. The empty desk sat still, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching her, the way the boy's eyes had. Her pencil lay on the floor where it had fallen. She bent to pick it up, and her gaze snagged on the clipboard Miss Calder had left on the corner of her desk, the attendance sheet. Evelyn's pulse raced. She knew she couldn't, but her hand moved anyway. She slid the clipboard closer, eyes darting over the list of names. 31. Her heart thudded. She counted again. 31. And at the very bottom, where yesterday there had been only 30, a new name had appeared, faint, gray, as if written in chalk dust instead of ink. Evelyn. But her name was already near the top, neat and black, in a place where it had always been. This was different, faint, fragile, like a shadow echo. Her throat went dry. It wasn't a mistake. It was a mark. She shoved the clipboard back, her hand trembling. For the rest of the day, she could barely focus. In science class, she stared at the Bunsen burner, but heard only whispers. In history, the words on the page blurred until they looked like names instead of dates. Her friends laughed and joked, and she caught them glancing through her like she wasn't there. By the time she walked home under the faded autumn light, the sticky note in her book felt heavier than bricks. Do not forget. But what if it was too late? What if she had already started to vanish? That night, Evelyn sat on her bed with her notebook open, forcing herself to write her name over and over in thick pencil. Evelyn, Evelyn, Evelyn. She pressed until the graphite smeared her fingers gray. When she looked back at the page, half the names had already faded. Her heart dropped. The forgotten weren't just in the back row anymore. They were pulling her towards them. Saturday morning dawned pale and brittle, sunlight slanting through Evelyn's curtains like thin blades of glass. She barely slept. Every time her eyes had shut, the faces against the inside of her mind, the girl with braids, the boy in suspenders, the one who looked like her cousin, they whispered the same words again and again. "We are here. We are here." Her notebook lay open across her blanket. The pages where she had written her name over and over now smeared into gray streaks. Only one Evelyn remained fully visible. Clinging to the page as though refusing to give up, she clutched her pencil like a lifeline. The sticky note still hung inside her math book, creased and wrinkled. Do not forget. For the first time, she understood what it meant. It wasn't just about a boy in the gray sweater. It wasn't even about the dozens of faces that filled his eyes. It was about every kid who had ever been overlooked, ignored, erased, and it was about her. If she let herself slip into silence, if she let her own name fade from memory, she would be gone too. She dressed slowly, her hazel eyes dull in the mirror, her mousy brown hair pulled into its usual ponytail. She looked like the kind of girl who would disappear into the crowd, forgotten within minutes. But she wouldn't let that happen. Not anymore. On Monday, Evelyn returned to school with her notebook tucked under her arm. When roll call began, she raised her hand firmly and answered her name louder than usual. Not too loud, but enough to fill the space. Her classmates turned their heads. A few blinked at her as if those surprised to hear her voice. For the first time, she didn't look away. During lunch, she spotted a girl from another class sitting alone at the edge of the cafeteria, eating in silence. Normally, Evelyn would have walked right past. Instead, she sat down across from her. "Hi," she said. "I'm Evelyn." The girl looked startled, then smiled weakly. Nina. Evelyn wrote the name in her notebook as soon as she could. Not because Nina might vanish, but because Evelyn had learned how easily it was for people to slip through the cracks if no one bothered to remember them. That afternoon, she flipped to the last page of her notebook to check her notes. Her breath caught. There, in fainted chalk letters that hadn't been there before, someone had written, "Good, you remembered." Her pencil trembled in her hand. The words faded a second later, smudged into nothing. But it was enough. The desk in the back row sat empty for the rest of the year. No gray sweater, no unblinking eyes, no whispers. Still, Evelyn kept her notebook close. Each night she wrote down the names of everyone she saw that day. Friends, strangers, even the quiet kids. No one else noticed, because she knew now what forgetting could do. And she knew that sometimes being remembered was the only thing that kept a person from turning into a ghost. Some kids shout and laugh so loudly you could never forget them, but others slip by quietly, their faces fading into the blur of memory. Evelyn learned that silence can be more haunting than noise, and that remembering is sometimes the only thing that keeps a soul alive. So next time you're in class, take a good look around, count the desks, count the names. If the number doesn't match, maybe you're not the only one keeping track. Thank you for listening to Sleep Tight Frights. Be sure to keep listening to hear your fear fact. Not all hauntings are found in pitch-black graveyards or depreciated mansions. Some linger right where we scrape our chairs and sharpen pencils. Schools, libraries, dorms. In Canada, whispered stories tell of echoing presences in classrooms. For example, New Westminster Secondary in BC holds a swimmer beneath the silent lanes of its basement pool. Students and staff whisper about ghostly splashes and coughing, as though someone is still drowning just out of sight. At Montreal's Villa Maria, quiet footfalls, swinging ropes, and flickering lights remind students that someone unseen still paces the halls. These spirits aren't seeking revenge. They're children who slipped too far from memory, waiting to be remembered. Thank you for listening to Sleep Tight Frights. It means more than you know, to us and to the things that listen back. I'm Ever Gray, your guide through the shadows, and if you felt something was watching as the story unfolded, you're not alone. They remember the ones who listen, they wait for the ones who return. So come back soon. Sleep tight if you can.